My name is Natalia, and I thought for so long I had found love who can take it out of you. Alexander and I have been together for almost 8 years, and we have been married for 3. Our life seemed perfect. We shared a home full of laughs, love, and futures. We have a 2-year-old boy called Mikhail, our savior. My own ex-husband has children of his own, and Alexander is a stepfather. And more gracefully and lovably than I could have ever imagined. He has been a father, a defender, the man who got me to think I could forget my breakups. He was a petty man from birth. Alexander went to work in the same time every day, returned home to family dinner, and played with the children before relaxing with me at night. He paid all the bills, planned little family outings to the park or the beach, and demanded that I remain home with the children. He said he needed me to look after them, and I was all for it. For years, I thought I was the luckiest woman on earth. But as life would have it, you'll find that nothing is ever perfectly. And quite so, as advertised. It began small, so little that I almost forgot about it. Alexander started working late, not the norm for the first years of our marriage. First, he'd phone me, apologizing hysterically and promising to repay me. I believed him because why wouldn't I? He had never given me anything to suspect of him. But the late nights got more regular, the apologies less enthusiastic. He looked so distant, so busy, his head in some twilight zone. I'd call him and explain what was wrong, and he'd dismiss me, explaining it was work stress or tiredness. And then there was the transition of intimacy. That was Alexander and I, together always, with these flashes of passion, which was part of why I loved him. But that part of our relationship had started to disappear the last year. It started out softly. He would be too tired or say he didn't feel like it. I tried to be kind, blame it on work and having a small child. But then it stopped altogether. Months passed with no sex, and whenever I raised it, Alexander would either move on or reject me. "It is not you," he'd say. "I am just tired." Those were his motto, and I began to suspect they were a means of comforting me or himself. Then one night Alexander decided he would stay in the guest room. He wanted space to clear his head. He wasn't sleeping well in our bed. I wanted to crow to make things right, but was so surprised I just said nothing and waved him away. Then that night I slept alone in our bed and was colder than I had been in years. The gap between us got smaller and smaller each day. Conversations that had been natural turned staccato and stilted. We stopped chuckling together, stopped telling one another about the small things in life that were so good. I became a house ghost, walking on eggshells in front of a man who had me feel like he was his center of gravity. Then came the night that was. Alexander had left his phone plugged in on the kitchen counter when he went upstairs to shower. There was no other time like that. He used to carry his phone everywhere. I didn't pay much attention to it, but when I drove by the counter, I caught a light on the screen telling me. Something made me stop. Call it gut feeling, call it gut sense, but I could not get rid of it. I answered the phone, hands shaking open the lock. That was from a woman called Alina, it said. "I miss you very much. Come over tonight." My heart dropped. I stared at the screen and made sense of it all. Alexander never had said a word to Alina. My brain went through a million questions, but there was one above all. I had to know. With the conscience still ringing at the edges of my body, I began their conversation. What I found cold-blooded me. There were love notes, rendezvous arrangements, and secrets that no one wanted to see. They'd seen each other for months. Alina knew me, she knew our son, she knew all of it, and she didn't even mind. Rather, she was enjoying herself in Alexander's life. She sent him pictures, shocking ones that made my stomach turn, and he returned with love and praised. They guffawed at things I didn't know, and they told me inside jokes, and they talked about a future that was not mine. They had a work relationship, the texts showed, and the fling was more than office heists. They went out on dates, they ate together, they even slept together. One wrote about how Alexander had taken Alina to have her birthday at one of the most posh restaurants in town. One woman described the presents he'd brought her. Designer clothes, designer jewelry, designer shoes. It was like I was floating in a sea of disloyalty. The guy I believed I knew, the guy I made a career of, was living a double life right next to me. I couldn't put it down. Every word a heartache became, and anger was raised. That same man who promised to love and be with me was living a life with another woman, someone I had no idea was out there at all. It wasn't until Alexander, a double life seemed so easy for me that I was shocked. His talks with Alina were not just about enthrallment or fetish. They talked of hopes, schemes, even joked that I was so blind. As one of them put it, "Does she suspect something?" And Alexander, "No, nothing. She thinks I'm stressed from work." It's almost too comfortable. I couldn't bear the stupidity of what he had to say. I read on and found out that they had been together for months. They had been together at work and it had all started, their text said so casually. Lunch, some chatter, then more. I made a few connections. They'd met at work for the first time, on a vacation Alexander had mentioned to me. It all made sense now. Late nights, unannounced need for space, emotional distance. All of it was pointing to Alina. She was just 23, so far so good, I gleaned from their text messages. Alexander had taken her out for her birthday to one of the most expensive restaurants in town, which he had never even mentioned for me. He bought her presents I could only wish for. Couture clothes, diamonds and shoes more expensive than our mortgage each month. What hurt was not just the breakup with our marriage. It was the fact that he made me feel like I wasn't even there. Why did he make the effort for another but make me a gimmick? I remembered how many times I had asked him if he was okay. How many times I had tried to reconnect with him. How many times he had made excuses. Now I understood why. Worst of all, they went through this thing with his work life as well. They would break for coffee and meeting in the car park or making late-breaking runs. They were writing about all these experiences, things I could not see. I even heard that Alexander had pretending to work late to be able to see him at night. I thought of one message. Alina had sent him a picture of herself in a pretty gown. "You suppose she'll never find out?" he said. "If she does, I already said I'm not getting married. Just a matter of time." That is a punch to the gut. I and Alexander never talked of separation, much less divorce. I didn't realize he did. And to read it mentioned so casually in a piece of writing was devastating. I'm in the dark kitchen and holding his phone and crying. My mind was racing. Should I confront him? Should I leave? What was I to defend Mikhail from all this? My older kids had already gone through divorce twice, and there was something about repeating that experience that just sucked. Alexander came downstairs and he saw me sitting there but didn't suspect anything. He kissed me on the head, said he had to go out and left the house. And I followed him out the door knowing exactly where he was and who he was going to see. These were hours I wouldn't soon forget. So I slept in and replayed it over and over again. Everything in our relationship now smelled bad. All happy times eclipsed by his falsehoods. I remembered the days when he had squeezed me, told me he loved me, and that we'd both get old. Were those promises ever real? I wanted to phone one of my friends to talk to them, but was ashamed. This was my third marriage. But how could I say that another husband had duped me again? I was cursed, like never to recover from the same love mishap. So the next day, I just continued to be the forgetful wife. I behaved as usual, smiled when I had to, even brought Alexander's lunch to work with me. But inside I was seething. I had to ask him every time he would turn his face at me. How could he do this? How could he betray not only me but our entire family? I began to take in the little things that I had previously failed to observe. His cologne, formerly something he wore only on special occasions, was now part of his day. His wardrobe had slowly shifted. He was in new clothes and more modern looking. And he had been paying closer attention to his phone too, keeping it by his side all the time, even taking it into the bathroom. They were the pieces to a puzzle assembled in a perfect sequence. And the image they told me about was not one I wanted to look at again. I was falling apart as the days rolled by. To pretend I had everything straight and betrayal Alexander's truth was eating me alive. Every time he said, "I love you," or kissed me goodnight, it hurt like a knife in my chest. But I continued the game, waiting to go head-to-head with him. I started capturing proof, screenshots of their texts and pictures. If we got divorced, which would never have happened, I wanted to have all this evidence. This wasn't just me, I knew. I had to keep Mikhail and my older kids from being taken by surprise by the event. One night Alexander arrived home late. The smell of a cologne that was not his own and the look in his eyes that belonged somewhere else. And he never said anything to me or the kids, just ran straight for the shower. I stood in the kitchen clutching the edge of the counter to steady myself. When he finally did come out, I said, "How was work?" He looked me in the eye and said, "Busy." So straightforward but so cold. I wanted to cry at him, want to get answers, but I didn't. When he went to bed that night in the guest room, I stood alone in the living room, flipping through the photos on my phone. Photos of joyous events, birthdays, vacations, family trips, flashed in front of me, all of them an agonizing symbol of what we had lost. I knew that the guy in those pictures was dead. He was somebody I had never seen before. My gut gave out a week later. Alexander had gone to work, so I came to visit him unannounced. I thought it was to get him lunch, but really I wanted to get him on the hook. When I showed up at his office, his employees smiled benignly. No one understood what was going on. One of them said, "Where was Alexander?" And then they looked at me and then they said, "Oh, he came out for lunch." My stomach hurt. I said goodbye and walked away, wanting to know where he had gone. He was driving in circles when I came across his car outside a small cafe on the other side of town. He sat next to Alina. I could see him from the window. They were chuckling, bending over and totally soaking up each other. Hands on the steering wheel as I resist the urge to break out. Rather, I drove a few yards and stood by. He and I left the cafe together, walked up to his car like nothing was happening. His opening the door for her when he hadn't done it to me in years was the final straw. Alexander had returned that night and I had met him in the kitchen. The children were asleep and everything was still except the clock on the wall. He came in and astonished to find me still standing. "We have to talk," I said, my voice shaking with dread and grit. He surveyed me with his arm, dropping his briefcase. "What is it?" I took a deep breath and set my phone down on the table. His screenshots with Alina on it. "I know everything," I said. He paled and, for a second, said nothing. And then he lied about it. "Natalia, you are misunderstanding." "Don't," I scolded hard. "Please do not call me out as if I have no idea what's happening. I've seen the messages. I know about her. I hear about the lunches, the presents, the lies." He sipped and put his hand in his hair. "I was going to tell you." He finally said, "Hush." "When?" Snap. "After you were already on the off. After you destroyed this family." Alexander fell down, shoulders sunk. "I am sorry, Natalia. Never meant it to make it this far. I do not know what I was thinking." His words felt hollow, empty. I wanted to believe him, but the injury was done. "You didn't know what you were thinking," I said again. "You were thinking of yourself, Alexander. About what made you tick, whatever it cost me, Mikhail, all of us. We talked, or rather argued, for hours." He admitted everything, but his excuses just got me worse. He said he had been undervalued, that our marriage had become tiresome, that he had been energized by someone else. "I gave you everything," I broke down crying. "I took care of you, I brought up our son, I lied to you. And you give me a thank you." Towards the end of the night, I was done. And as much as I cried, as much as I tried to cling on to my son, I could not remain in a marriage of lies and betrayal. I went to a lawyer next morning.